There's a few conditional nens all throughout Hunter x Hunter, and in general, they're really strong abilities. Hey, what's up everybody? It's LeeLos, and today we're talking about why Kurapika versus Uvogin is genius. Stay steady in pursuit of your dreams and goals. You're born to win, you're made for greatness, and I definitely believe in you guys. Keep up the great work each and every day. So, Uvogin versus Kurapika is a battle between one of the smartest characters in all of Hunter x Hunter versus the physically strongest member of the Phantom Troop. Today we're going to analyze every single element of this battle to explain overall why Kurapika versus Uvogin is genius. So this battle is very valuable to the overall story of Hunter x Hunter because we get in-depth information on the differences between nen types, and we learn that conditional nen is extremely powerful in general. Kurapika's nen master Izunavi explains that since Kurapika's nen affinity is conjuration, he at best would only have 60% proficiency in enhancement. Conjurers and manipulators are the most likely to change nen types and actually become a specialist later in life. Izunabi then goes on to state that in general, enhancers that match you in aura capacity and aura output will in general have an advantage against every other type. We get a number representation to show us what this would look like if two nen users of equal nen output and equal nen capacity are fighting one another, and one is an enhancer while the other is a conjurer. The enhancer would have 200 power to go into their physical attacks. Meanwhile, a conjurer would only have a 160, meaning in general, the enhancer would win in a straight up fist fight. There's many different elements to nen combat that can change this equation. For example, how people feel from day to day can affect their overall condition. Bisky goes over a similar concept when she tells Killua that in some cases, a weaker nen user can defeat a stronger nen user if the weaker nen user is in their best condition, meanwhile the stronger nen user is having an off day or is in bad condition. Izunavi goes into more detail and explains that emotions factor into your nen. Strong emotions can make your nen more powerful, and in some cases you might even be able to go beyond 100%, meaning in theory, in some cases, a conjurer with the same aura capacity and aura output of an enhancer might still win a fistfight if all of the conditions are in the conjurer's favor. We actually see great examples of emotion amplifying your nen through Gon Freaksis. He's probably the best example of this in the entire series. When we see Gon gets angry, his power skyrockets, so much so that he's almost a different character altogether. However, Gon is probably a unique case because we see even before Gon learns nen, the same thing happens. At the start of the series, when Gon got angry, he broke Allumi's arm. So for Gon, it might just be a Freaksis bloodline thing. So other characters can get amplifiers from their emotions too, but from what we've seen in the series, Gon's probably the most dramatic example of this. There are things you can't conjure even if you're a master conjurer. For example, a sword that can cut anything, it simply cannot be created by nen because it's beyond human capacity. In general, you can't conjure something that's overly supernatural. We don't get much more of an explanation as to what they mean by something beyond human capacity. So in theory, maybe it means if it can't be built by humans in the real world, then it can't be conjured with nen. This is a real problem with conjurers, and it makes it hard for conjurers to even be useful in battle when they're first learning their abilities, because essentially most things that a conjurer can make with their Hatsu ability, they might as well just save up their money and buy that thing in the real world. Kurapika decides that he wants to conjure chains, and even though it's impossible to conjure unbreakable chains, Izunavi says you can make chains very close to unbreakable using conditional nen. Adding conditions or limitations to your ability make them more powerful. The more strict the limitation, the more power you gain from the conditional nen. Izunavi states that if nen just adds to your power, then conditional nen is like multiplying your power. Kurapika then proceeds to make a list of extremely dangerous conditional nen, and this leads to Kurapika becoming extremely powerful. Other characters in Hunter x Hunter also display conditional nen, and for most characters, it's depicted to be a trump card ability. For example, Phaeton's Pain Packer, his condition is that when he takes damage, he can release a stronger Pain Packer based on how much damage he takes. With Netero, his condition is that he pours all of his aura into one attack, and then he can unleash Zero Hand. Also, Netero's meditation that he does in the mountains might be part of his condition for Zero Hand as well. There's a few conditional nens all throughout Hunter x Hunter, and in general, they're really strong abilities. But Kurapika is one of the only characters that we see see, who uses life-risking conditional nen, and as a result he gets tremendous power from it. One of Kurapika's conditional nen abilities is Emperor Time, Absolute Mastery. When Kurapika enters Emperor Time, he becomes a specialist, and he gains 100% proficiency in all nen types. This ability, Emperor Time, Absolute Mastery, in general is one of the most powerful Hatsu abilities in all of Hunter x Hunter, because it basically lets Kurapika break the rules of nen. You simply should not be able to just use 100% proficiency in every category, but Kurapika does using Emperor Time Absolute Mastery. We later find out that Emperor Time has the condition where every 1 second of using Emperor Time takes an hour off of Kurapika's lifespan. There's a bit of debate over when Kurapika developed this condition. Either he developed this condition during his initial 6 months of training before he even fought Uvogin, or he developed it afterwards while he was going on missions to retrieve the Scarlet Eyes. That being said, this insane condition would explain why Kurapika becomes so insanely powerful. This also highlights an interesting parallel between Kurapika and Chrollo. Chrollo is a specialist who steals other people's abilities. Meanwhile, Kurapika, when he uses his Scarlet Eyes, becomes a specialist and can steal other people's abilities as well. It brings up the question of, does Chrollo also have 100% proficiency on all nen types? Chrollo steals all kinds of abilities, and there's no mention of him using them worse than the original owner, so it's an interesting thought. All that being said, the entire fight with Kurapika versus Uvogin is extremely one-sided. The fight starts out, Uvogin's using 20%, and he's doing absolutely nothing to Kurapika. Kurapika's speed blitzing and actually kind of embarrassing him. Uvogin then goes up to 50%, and the same thing is happening. Uvogin's still being speed blitzed and kind of embarrassed by Kurapika. Then even when Uvogin goes into 100% and uses Big Bang Impact to break Kurapika's arm, Kurapika instantly heals it and reveals that he had already trapped Uvogin in chain jail. If you look closely at the very beginning of the fight, there's actually a panel where Kurapika dodges one of Uvogin's attacks and he says chain jail. So he might have actually captured Uvogin at literally the very beginning of the fight. We don't find out until the end of the chapter that Uvogin was trapped in chain jail because Kurapika was using Een to make the chains invisible. This is actually just a really smart nen strategy that Kurapika thought of. He carries around real chains and enhances them with nen, but he's so powerful using Emperor Time that people think he's a manipulator. And while they're dodging the real chains, they don't think to themselves to look out for invisible chains. Then Kurapika reveals the original chains have already wrapped around his opponent. This is just a very smart strategy. Essentially, he's tricking his opponent before the fight even starts because he's making them think that he's a manipulator, but really Kurapika's a conjurer. This fight is very early on in Hunter x Hunter, and Togashi had not really gone in detail explaining the concept of Ken just yet, so there's a chance he hasn't thought of Ken. However, one thing you can say that would scale Kurapika really high is you could say that Kurapika's performing all of these feats just using Ten, meanwhile Uvogin is using Ken. If you view it like that, then Kurapika scales above like so many people in the series, because Ken is much more powerful than just Ten is. Let me know what you guys think about that. Since Uvogin states that he's going from 20% to 50% power to 100% power, if he is using Ken here, that would mean that you can actually use Ken at different power levels. You could output your Ken at 20%, you could output your Ken at 50%, you could output your Ken at 100%. So if Uvogin actually is using Ken here, then this is just an interesting concept when it comes to Ken. Another thing I wanted to mention is Kurapika's Nen Master tells Kurapika that enhancers can reinforce offense, defense, and healing the most efficiently. The healing part is actually very interesting because it tells you that enhancers can heal, and we actually see Kurapika do this. That's how he heals his broken arm. Also, I wonder if that was how Netero was healing his limbs after he got his limbs chopped off by Meruem. But yeah, overall, Kurapika just kind of destroys Uvogin. He shows us that using conditional Nen, you can make yourself very powerful very quickly. Kurapika overall is still very new to Nen, but he's actually over here beating up the physically strongest member of the Phantom Troop using a list of conditional Nens. But yeah, that's everything I wanted to say. Thank you guys for watching. I appreciate the views in the comments. Like and subscribe, and I'll see ya on the next one.